It's yours.
Right. Well, really, this came about because of something that was on an anonymous survey at the beginning of last year, and I actually know who it was. Cahill. So I blew his anonymity, but he basically pointed out through that comment that the CTE focuses on teaching in a classroom environment, and he just said, when are we ever going to get to talk about the kind of teaching I do, which is one-on-one in a studio. He teaches piano. So we all have situations where we're one-on-one with students. I mean, we have students come by our office, and our 8 hours of time often spills over into more hours of time with students every week, and that's one-on-one usually time. We advise. There are a lot of ways in which we do this, but some people, this is their bread and butter. This is their normal, everyday interaction, not with a group, but with individuals. Or in some cases, it's making time for that to happen. In the case of Chris here, you make time every week, right, to be with students, which is amazing. So we just want to hear from some people today who can speak to this focus that they have on one-on-one. And I think by having this focus, we actually can get to the very heart of what teaching is about. So many times when you're dealing with a room full of people, there's a lot of engagement talk. You want to find a way to engage the students. That is just a non-issue in these environments we're going to be talking about today. There's no entertainment value. It's what you get down to the core issues of what are our goals for this person, holistically conceived, not just how are they going to do on this test, but you're more likely to think about this as a person that you're teaching. So that gets into there. And when you're thinking about their success as a person, you're thinking about different kinds of questions. It causes you to approach the whole thing in a different way, and that's what I'd love to hear today. We'll start with Chris, and the reason I asked Chris is actually because I thought, there are a lot of one-on-one coaches out there. I'm thinking of tennis. I'm thinking of golf. But I talked to Andrea Hudson and said, so who would you recommend? And she said, well, I'm right near the office of Chris here, and I hear him with his open door. And so I got I got my little bird on the tree.
I'll be keeping it closed now.
And she said, there's nobody better. This guy does it so well. So you should ask him. And that's what I did. And Chris was gracious enough to speak and, let us hear some Manchester sounds. Sound of Manchester will be heard in Cleveland, Tennessee today before your very ears. So take it away.
All right, well, thank you guys. It's funny, I've never really thought about what particularly the model looks like from a leadership perspective from my end when I've sat down and written it out, but spending some time reflecting over it, it was hard to try and fit it in the segment. And I think the hard thing is the one-on-one coaching and the team philosophy and the team kind of goals, they're all very much interconnected. And it's important that I think when I set out at the start of every semester, I always have a goal and then subset of goals underneath, and that subset of goals underneath really are the individual players and how we get those guys with the same vision kind of going in the right direction to enter what the end goal is for the team. So to kind of break it down, to start off with the one-on-one pieces, what we do as a staff is we meet with every single player at the start of the semester, or just as we get in through pre-season. After the first week of classes, we'll meet with them individually, and just simply to check on how they think that pre-season has gone for them, certainly the freshmen, on how they're adapting to life, because it's such a different feel to things. Like, everything's flying by, it's very easy to feel overwhelmed, so we make sure we check in on those guys, and we'll find out from a class perspective. I think there's a gentleman.
I got it. Where's open? Right there. On the speaker.
So simple questions and simple concepts we go into in those individual meetings range from checking in on them academically, which is obviously why they're here at Lee and the most important thing, checking in with them on a social aspect and how life outside of soccer and academics is going on, family-wise, that, and then the soccer piece. Because what we've found in the past, if something's not right in the classroom or something's not right in the social life, it affects the soccer. And if they're not, and if one of those three pillars are off, then it can, you know, really affect the balance of the person. And ultimately, our goal as a staff is to have these guys graduate, have gotten an education at Lee, and have grown and have put them in situations where they're uncomfortable, where they've had to adapt, persevere, and then how they've come out on the other side. So we challenge them through each stage, and it might be after a performance, we'll bring them in individually, and before we say anything and criticise is a harsh word, but kind of refine what we want them to do, we always give those guys the opportunity to express how they feel or how they think their performance was, because what we find is if I start, they'll just agree for the sake of agreeing, right? Because they want to make the coach happy. Whereas if you let them talk, you often find a deeper root to the problem than it you know, they might have a bad performance because it could be something medical we're not aware of, it could be something going on back home. So before I want to jump to my gun and start being hard on them, I want to make sure everything is going well from there. And then we always talk about solutions of how we're going to come out of it and how do we grow from this situation. So that's really what we do on an individual basis, and we'll do that twice a semester, fall and spring. And then moving from kind of that first layer of subset goals going into more of a team perspective, we'll then meet with the captains and the staff. And during that process, we come up every semester, every season, we come up with a mantra. And I think a mantra is important because first couple of years, we always would bring recruits in and we'd talk to them, and they would talk to our players and they'd be like, this is what we do, this is who we're about. But we never really had a set vision or a set identity as a team. So we came up with a mantra last year for the first time that worked really well. And we looked back and thought, how did the mantra go? And everything, but last year's mantra didn't fit the personality and characters of this year's team. So we've changed that up this year again. So that way, when we develop that through the leadership and we empower our captains to lead from within, because that's very important when you're setting a team culture. They have to be loyal, but they also have to bridge the gap between coaches and players sometimes in a way that's, you know, that's acceptable. So we bring all that together, and then we talk to the team, give the team the vision, give the team the goals, give the team the identity, and then the rest of it through the culture and who we are as a team and what we want to be known for on and off the field kind of pulls those people that may be just edging on the grey area over here or the grey area here, and collectively pulls us all in one direction and keeps us going forward and stuff like that. And ultimately, you know, I feel from a leadership perspective, I always say that your true character during the 90 minutes of a soccer game will show at some point, right? So same with leadership. I don't think you can go out there and pretend to be fake or someone you're not, because at some point, at some stage, your true character, your personality, whatever it may be, will show. And I think being genuine and being who you are, and the most important thing we try to do is create a fun environment, because there's so much pressure on coaches, on the players to perform in the classroom, on the field. It's like if you take the fun out of soccer, which is supposed to be a release for them, and then that then becomes a job and a chore, then it's like, what are they doing? You know, it's like it just takes away all those years of that release for them. So we keep it fun. We always make sure it's enthusiastic and energetic at practice, and you know, whenever the team's going through a tough moment, we always make sure we do something different in there and make practice fun, or take them out somewhere and do things like that. So it's just keeping them, keeping them enthused, keeping them on the right track, and like I say, everybody does their bit within the team. Everybody knows their role within the team, and so far we feel like we've got good momentum. So that's just kind of a brief insight, if that's helpful.
Oh, that's really helpful. Yeah.
Well, it really is.
So you've been here 4 years. In the first 2 years, you made it to the finals, or what do you call it? The tournament at the
NCAA tournament.
NCAA
Yes.
tournament. But then you made it to Sweet 16, and then the Final Four this last 2018. Correct?
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, you made such strides, and I've watched the play, and it is just amazing teamwork. I mean, I'm getting into soccer because of my kids, but
Yeah.
do you feel like when you meet with these people, what's the balance between individual life issues versus skills or goals on the field? What's your balance between those in those conversations?
So it can be a difficult question to answer. So we as a program want to strive to win a national championship. That's our end goal. But we understand life at a school in Division 2 has to be more balanced than it is at a Division 1 school. So what we do is it starts from the recruiting process. So we're trying to find the kids that have a very competitive desire, that want to win, because there's a difference between winning and really wanting to win. Like, that's the first characteristic we're looking at. So once we feel we have that kind of mindset from an individual, we can challenge them to go and do the extra that they need to do, because there's just not enough time in the day for them to perfect their craft and be the best and put academics and social on top. So we feel that out per the individual, you know, and some of them will go out and do things on their own when we tell them to. Some of them will just need, like, maybe a coach or us guys to invest in them for a couple of days to get them and get their enthusiasm up a little bit, and then they'll go out and do it on their own. So finding that balance is important in the moment that they're going through.
Is that outside of practice? You're meeting one-on-one?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Okay.
So it'll either be before or after practice. We'll get individuals, or we'll take functional training where we'll take, if the strikers haven't scored for a couple of games, we'll just take them out and just kind of go through some stuff and take the pressure off them and things like that. Yeah.
Great. Wow. Well, let me make sure that if you all have some questions, you can ask it now before you forget what you want to ask.
Yeah.
I just love the reminder for those of us that actually teach classes where, again, it's not the one-on-one, but it needs to be one-on-one.
Yeah.
And that's the reminder of that, is that, and you said it so well at the beginning, if something's going on in their personal lives or in some other aspect of their lives, that may explain why they're not a good student in my class at this point. And that's why it's just a reminder to me to have those individual conferences with every class member. I just read a book on effective teaching that we're going to start a book club chat on. And that's, again, one of the sections of it is the power of that one-on-one, no matter, and try to work it in no matter what size. So again, that was just such a good reminder, Chris. And then your goals and your subset of goals, and then the theme. I'm actually seeing that play out in the LEAP program, what I've seen of that already. So anyway, thank you for that. That's why these sessions are always about more than what they appear to be about. This looks like one-on-one, but it's all of us. It's what we do, whether we teach classes or one-on-one. Yeah. Powerful.
Questions? Comments? Well, we'll have time later too, so let's move on. So Tony, let's move to you next. So let's see, you got the Excellence in Teaching Award in what, 2007, I believe?
I don't remember. It's been a long
Are
time.
you the only studio teacher to receive that award? I
So
think
far.
you are. Yeah, that's the top award, at least. I mean, hands down, that's it. So
Yeah,
that's amazing.
I don't know how I got it.
It was humility.
If you, did it breed certain requests on your time? When I talk to students, though, they rave about you. They respect you and they love you, both, which is amazing. And they might not act like it, but outside the studio, that's how they talk. But I really admire the way you're constantly practicing. You're modeling for your students a life that you love the music that you make. It's not just you're instilling a craft that you used to work on, but it is your art right now. And I think they picked that up. You've also written a book. What was it called?
Stop, Look, and Listen, a practical guide to vocal technique and feathers.
Was that 2013 or something like that? I think it's 2013 you wrote that thing.
Yeah,
Anyway,
it's been a few years ago.
yeah. Good. You are.
I'm into triple digits now.
What was your
My
purpose?
six.
And you already said it, but this is one of our last chances to pick your brain here. So now, when you wrote that book, you were trying not to get into anatomy and physiology, the way you produce sound. What was your goal in writing this book?
To make it simple, I think that singers sometimes, and I will admit that I have changed my thinking a little bit since I started teaching vocal pedagogy. that some students, they get into all that stuff about how the body is made up, what's on the inside and all that. But my approach, and I think generally students, if they could get very preoccupied with that. You know, these muscles are doing this and all this, and they're trying to memorize the names of all those muscles. And you're just sitting there, just sing. You know? And I didn't bring my book, but there's a quote. I quoted Cornell McNeil, who was Metropolitan Opera baritone for years. He said, you know, singing is a very simple thing in theory. Now, it's not simple in practice, but in theory, it's a simple thing, and we can make it very complicated. I think he said opera is a very simple thing, but opera and singing, it's kind of hard to separate those two. So anyway, shall I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
So what do you do
Well,
when you teach? What are your goals? What's your practice?
Well, let me just start. If I get off my little list here.
Okay, you go with your list. That's great.
First of all, first thing I wrote was I'm glad to be paired with a coach because I'm a big sports fan for one thing, and the other thing is that we talk about singers as vocal athletes, and there are a lot of comparisons to singing and singers and athletes. The makeup of the body itself, I'm talking more about the external part, but also exercising the voice for strength and endurance, to sing higher and faster. A lot of the exact same things that coaches are trying to train athletes to do, we try to train singers to do. And that also kind of works as an advantage for me because some students see me as kind of a stilted opera singer, and when I tell them I'm a big sports fan and I start making those analogies, then it kind of makes them believe I'm just a normal person and I like the same things that they do.
They believe that?
When I start talking about Tennessee football,
That's a short conversation now.
and in boxing, I'm a big boxing fan. I talk about the balance and keeping the balance in the body as a singer. So some of the things Chris said are exactly one-on-one, and some of the things that I had written down, he said them a lot better than I'll say them, not just because he has a beautiful British accent compared to mine, but he said them very well. The obvious is that applied teaching is one-on-one, and classroom teaching is you're teaching the class, and in the studio teaching, you're teaching the individual, and all the things about the personal and emotional things that are going on are important, and so that's why it's necessary to build a trust. In the classroom, you also have a distance, a physical distance of space. And in studio teaching, you're very close. Sometimes, right in their face, sometimes looking right in their mouth to see their tongue position, literally. So it can be intimidating and make a student feel a bit vulnerable. So building a trust on a very different level. Also, in the classroom, you have, this is a little bit different issue of trust, but you have a classroom of, quote, witnesses. When you're behind the closed door and it's just you and the student, and we don't have windows on our doors, unfortunately, and that's been a real issue for us.
Yeah.
And they're aware of that, and it's a very closed environment. And so, again, building that trust so that you can make make progress with that student.
It's kind of like they need to know that you're on their side for them to be able to take the criticism and the input. Is it that?
Absolutely, yeah. Even sometimes you have to physically touch the students. And I always ask them, is it okay? Normally, I will have them, if I'm checking their breathing, I will have them put their hands there, and that I will put my hands on top of it, so I'm not actually touching, but I still ask. But it's very intimate teaching. I'm talking about teaching voice, a little bit different in teaching other instruments. You see, I feel like I'm some of the, your approach to individuals also has to be very specific to the student. When I talk about tonal concepts, I tend to think in shapes, and I say, think a round tone. And it took me practically a whole semester. One time I kept telling the student, think a round tone. She finally said, Mr. Deaton, I don't think in shapes, I think in colors. So I said, okay, what color do you see? What's your favorite color? And it never occurred to me that she would see color in tone, but it makes perfect sense now, because on some level I do as well. The individual makeup of students is so different, and how they feel the sensations, and I'm being more specific to voice, because it is such a physical instrument. It's right here. And I saw a thing just yesterday, as a matter of fact, that somebody shared with me, that some students, they feel the tone there, some here, some here. Well, for me, it's all right here in the mask. But and that's the way I teach it. But I tell them, you may feel it differently, and then relating to that somehow, so they can make sense of it. The other thing that's quite different is are the weekly assignments. They are totally different from a classroom. You are not only giving an assignment for a specific technique, but and issues for a student to work toward, but also the repertoire is totally individual. You give a classroom assignment, everybody has the same assignment, but the students come in with different songs, different, totally different repertoire. And you're measuring not only the songs, but their progress, their talent, their ability, their use of a healthy vocal technique. I know Ron would say this. You have a kid who can make this beautiful, glorious tone, but a good teacher knows it isn't built on a secure technique. And students will often use that talent, that God-given talent, and they let them carry it so far. But that ability to know if they're actually using a technique, and that's what you're measuring along with the natural God-given talent. Their work ethic, and you're judging their potential. You're trying to see the final exam for us is the performance. And the odd thing is it's in real time. What I mean by that is you give a final exam or any exam, the student can write the answer, then they can think about it, they go back and erase it, and so on. And performance, that's it. Yeah. And the odd thing is, believe it or not, it has to be almost 100% every time. right down to the 32nd note. You don't sing a 32nd note wrong. It has to be the 32nd note, and exact. And no, there's no hiding place. Then Chris touched on this, and I'll take it a little bit, or talk about it slightly differently. The physical and emotional health of students. I often say that if a concert pianist is sick, or a violinist or whatever, they may not play that instrument as well, but say the piano feels fine. It has no feelings. It doesn't get its heart broken. Its mother didn't die, But when we have personal or emotional issues as singers, I'll guarantee you it will affect you. You cannot sing if you are too tied up emotionally. And Chris was talking about that. It will break you down. You cannot. I'm dealing with a kid now whose parents, they have just divorced, as a matter of fact. And his mother has a live-in boyfriend. And, he broke down and cried yesterday. He did not have a lesson. And sometimes you just got to listen and let them talk, let them get it out. And I always say, I don't ask questions. I'm here to listen. And I said, the next thing you need to do is you need to go to the counseling center. All right, let me see. Being sensitive. We say we're a third musician, the third medical professional, and a third psychologist. All right, and
That's
yeah.
the truth.
And I think the obvious is that if you can inspire the student to want to do better and be better, encourage and motivate them, and then convince them that they can, convince them that they can be better. All right, that's more or less. Made just some comparisons to the classroom and the studio teaching. If you can get them to believe in themselves, it reminds me, I'll end with a sports anecdote. Frank Broyles, who was the legendary football coach at Arkansas, he later was a color commentary with Keith Jackson on ABC, Saturday afternoon games, and he just made a very passing comment once, but I've thought about it so many times. He says, success comes so much easier when you believe in yourself. And if you could convince that kid, you can do this, and they start to believe in themselves, it's pretty amazing how far they can go.
I think we've all seen students who they're afraid of failure, so they don't want to even act like they care. And so there's something about you're building them up that allows them to take a risk, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen that transformation in anybody?
Yeah, and you can tell them, and that will help, but somehow they have to believe it. I mean, it helps. You can tell them, their friends can tell them, and that's why it gets so personal. And speaking of personal, I'll just tell you, I did not believe in myself, and it came from my upbringing, and I'm still in self-therapy about it. It was a very intimidating, abusive, put down way that I grew up. It takes a long time to get over that. And thank God I had music. That was my escape. And but I don't know that I ever truly believed in myself. I mean, I did to some degree, but
Yeah. There's something about the scripture too that comes into play. Like 1 Peter 4:10 and 11. God has given each of you a gift from His spirit, great variety of spiritual gifts. Use them well to help one another. Has He given you a gift of speaking? I think music is like, you've got a quote like that in your book. It's like singing is like speech with some, I forget how you said it. It's very poetic, but with some sound in there. I don't know. I don't remember how I said it. But speak as though God Himself were speaking through you. Has He given you the gift of helping others? Then do it with all the strength and energy that He supplies. And if we can view Him as our real Father and reorient our mind to what a Father is, and I know what you're talking about because I've felt those same things. But to know that you've been adopted by this one really good Father who doesn't just have you go out there and do your thing and you evaluate. Instead, He's saying, I want to be involved, with all the energy and strength that He supplies. So it's not just that He's made you and now He's going to evaluate how you did, but He's in the process. And that brings a different kind of confidence. It's confidence in yourself, yes, but in His ability to work as well.
Well, I ask students, or tell them, I say, who put this passion in you? Where did this come from?
Yeah.
Came from God. This passion for great music. I mean, what we call great. We music snobs call great music. For classical music, for oratorio, opera, arts. So where did this come from? Well, it came from your Creator. That's how He made you.
Yeah.
And then, but it's taken me a while to realize that, and that's how you can glorify God by celebrating this gift, this passion He has put in us.
Yeah. Great. Comments or questions for Tony?
Just one comment, Tony. I thought it was interesting that you touched on the trust,
Yeah.
because that's really important. I think once you have the trust of your players or your students, then whatever you tell them, they're going to go and do, and they're going to give you that extra, every time. But putting yourself in an environment with no windows on, obviously someone can take a photo, or that student or this student athlete can say this, even though it didn't happen, and it's on social media. That is a really important part where that trust comes in. And sometimes when we have difficult conversations with kids over performance or something that they've not, that's not been held up to the standard of the soccer program, I always make sure I have a female or an administrator in there also, because you never want to put yourself in those. So I find it, yes, from a coaching perspective, but I never realised or thought about it from a teaching perspective as well in normal student life.
Something that we share, because we both do the same job, but we've never talked about this, and it's probably a shame that we haven't. But the difference, the hat you have to wear in a teaching studio versus in the classroom. And we should have talked about this. I don't know why we never did, but the intensity and the never being able to rest in a studio is a completely different paradigm than when we're in a class, because there's no place for us to rest.
Yeah, no.
So if you teach a good batch of students in a day, you are exhausted, and what you've done is sit on a piano bench, and it is utterly exhausting. It's a complete different headspace than if you're in a class.
Constantly giving.
Yes.
Giving.
So this is why, I'll just say me, I won't even say him, but when, like a few years ago, all this stuff came around about assessment and all, what is it, like critical thinking and everything, every moment of my job is critical thinking, assessing, prescribing. Every 60 seconds. It's exhausting, and you've got to be on your game every time. So he's been on his game for I don't know how many years now. He's about to quit his job.
96, I think, right? You can't before.
But it's a thing. It's a specific kind of skill that people like him have just demonstrated long term.
That's a good point.
That's it's just so different than class.
Do you build in breaks in your day?
No.
You just go for it. Wow.
Well, other than just lunch.
Yeah.
Well,
we got you here.
Typically we teach between a 50 and a 55-minute lesson. So I mean, you got time to
Go to the bathroom.
go to the restroom, or sometimes I'll just walk outside
Yeah.
And I'll tell the student I'll be back in a minute. I've got to step outside.
Wow.
Yeah.
Or just walk down the hall or something.
Mhm. Right.
Any particular students you remember that it took a while for you to get through to them?
Oh, you mean on the trust level?
Trust and a musical level and everything else. That you thought, well, this student's not going to get it, and then all of a sudden the light came on.
That's a hard question.
42, I just left.
Yeah. No, the reason I was asking is because I have a student at 1 o'clock. I can't think of one just offhand. I do know one student, maybe another, a different example, is a student that I had that didn't have a lot of natural talent, but worked hard. Man, it's just unbelievable what they can do with fairly slim talent. They really work and apply themselves. And I didn't mention this, I had it in my notes, and I guess I just skipped over it. It's kind of has to do with trust, but and also knowing the individual student. Jean knows this student, Sarah Lemper, and she's still probably one of my best students and most favorite to teach. And the thing I loved about Sarah, and I could not do this with a lot of students. Now, a few of them you can, but I mean, I could get in her face and just come on.
Yeah.
I just want to learn. Yeah. She said that she told me after she studied with me for 2 or 3 years. She said said he'll make you cry. She said he will not. She said he'll not make me bad, but he won't make me cry. But then there are other students that, I mean, you'll lose them. They will wilt. I mean, and you've got to be sensitive to that. I think that classroom teaching, you pretty much, it's a pretty generalized approach. But you can't say I'm going to teach every student the same, because everyone is so totally different. You want to be fair, have the same degree of fairness, I think, but their personality reacts so differently. Some you bring along, and they will get there. But
yeah, that's good. Well, Chanmony, thank you for being here.
Thank you so
You
much.
guys, do you go by Cham?
I go by either Cham
Okay.
or Chanmony.
Chanmony. Okay. Well, you have experienced a couple different things. As I understand it, Kimberly Moffitt helped you hone your topic as a McNair scholar, and then helped you get your survey out to her network of people, and then was it last summer?
This summer.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
just finished it.
Michael Sturgeon helped you with the process. Was it the literature review?
The literature review, the data analysis, and then pulling it all together in a written article.
I see, great. And your work is basically about teachers learning how to recognize and help students who have experienced trauma?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you've had a couple different mentoring relationships, 2, maybe more, I don't know. But can you describe that for us?
Yes, sir. Thanks again for inviting me here.
Thanks for being here.
Like you said, I got very privileged to be a part of the McNair program. And when I joined it, I knew that I wanted to work with Dr. Moffitt just because of her expertise in working with students with emotional and behavioral disorders. And I knew that I wanted to work with the idea of trauma in the classroom because trauma is just something I'm interested in from both a personal and a professional level. And then, but I had this kind of like nebulous idea in my mind. And I told Dr. Moffitt, and she's like, well, that's a little too broad, you're going to have to hone it in. And I just kind of gave her this blank stare of, oh dear, I have no clue what to do from here. And so she actually was the one who suggested, well, let's look at teachers' perceptions of trauma. Let's go at it from that angle. And so that was just great because her having had practice in the field would have known what outlet to take it, whereas I just had this broad idea of something in here is going to be interesting. And so that was the first way that working with a faculty member with more experience was just very helpful in my own research and my own endeavors. And then from there, over the spring, I started my literature review, went through the IRB process, wrote the survey to send out to educators, and she was really helpful in like, hey, we need to keep these deadlines, like, hey, these are when we need to get our proposals turned in, and making sure that I was staying on top of these things, and even just knew where to go and where to turn for all of these things, and how to write this survey, and all of these different things. And then the summer started, and I began more full-time working on my research. And in the McNair program, we were all told that we needed to meet with Dr. Sturgeon at least some point over the summer, so that we could work on the literature review, and we could kind of get like that approval with our writing and whatnot. And so I was able to meet Dr. Sturgeon through there, and I found that this wasn't something I wanted to do just once over the summer, and I found that he was a really helpful resource, not only in finding the articles. I now know like the little tricks of the trade to find that one article without having to pay $47 for it, because I had the stipend, but if I didn't have to use it, that would have been nice. And so being able to kind of work around that and get those little tips and techniques, but also just having someone to bounce ideas off of and kind of pull what I was starting to hit on, but just kind of pull that out and be able to refine that. Plus there's a certain level of, when I started the semester, or started summer, I'm very much an extrovert, and the thought of, okay, literature, like research is fun, but you want me to sit at a computer for how many hours a day and just read, and there's slightly terrifying idea just to that. And so having a place to then be able to go throughout the summer and say, here are the articles I'm reading, this is what I'm learning, this is connecting with this, and being able to externally process all this information that I was starting to download and starting to pull in was really helpful to then not just take in these facts, but then actually make the connections that a good researcher can, and be able to pull that in with the research, with the survey that I was conducting. And so just lots of different things like that.
It's kind of remarkable too how your research kind of ties into what we're talking about today. Can you say a little bit about that too?
Yes, sir. So again, just looking at how do teachers perceive trauma, how do they think it affects their classroom, and what is their own self-efficacy in both recognizing trauma-related behaviors and being able to help students. If you look at the psychology and the neuroscience of trauma, especially during a person's early developmental years, trauma, I mean, I think we all kind of recognize how like stuff that goes on at home affects their performance, whether on the field or whether on a test or in vocal performances. But there's actually now the neuroscience in the last 20 or so years that shows that prolonged stress, whether from abuse, whether from having a parent in jail, whether going through a divorce, any of these things actually changes the brain's structure and the brain's functioning. And even just getting to some of the details, like the prefrontal cortex is inhibited, and the corpus callosum actually is a smaller size than that of a neurotypical student. And this will affect a student's memory and attention. It affects their ability to think abstractly. And so, again, as someone wanting to go into special education, this actually can lead to worsened learning disabilities, or worsened ADHD, or ASD, or all of these different things. And so not only is it affecting their ability to trust and relate to their peers and to authority figures, but it's actually affecting their ability to think and their cognition. So
this is a weird connection in my mind, but so I can be pretty scattered, but if I run myself to oblivion, then I'm really much better off that day. So maybe we gotta get it. You know what I mean? That is really terrific. That really does tie in so well. What was your impression of these relationships that you have? You're mentoring
A lot of this ties together to exactly what both Chris and Antonio said. Right up front, the one thing I always try to do is make everybody at ease. Because first of all, they think research, and I see trembling even though it's non-existent. It's there. I know it's there. and my office is kind of dim. I got that idea from Bob Fisher, so I can't claim that as my own. And there's soft music running in the background. Within 5 minutes, there's a calmness, and it was a try on my part. From some readings, but still, I didn't buy into it until I saw it. And once I would just listen to the students. One of the things that I found myself overcoming that I think is a big issue on one-on-one, and that is nothing is when a student is telling about a concern they have. The response is not, "Oh, well, that's easy," or "That's simple." It's big. If it's big to the student, I have to recognize it's big. Period.
It goes right back to what it goes.
Yeah.
It's all tied
Just what
in
you were saying.
so neatly.
And when you start building that kind of a rapport, that they understand, that they see that you're understanding, they're certainly more open to your critique. I also tried to make sure that they got to the point of where they would outwardly say, and not all did. I had 24 students or something. They would, the majority would say, I like to see a lot of red. You were one of them. She was one. She would. I like to see more red marks on my writing. No, well, if it's not required, I'm not going to put it there, but I will put comments in between saying, I really like how you phrased this. This is well stated. But it might be surrounded by a lot of things that need corrected. But I think you need to insert the positive. Be there as I'm there first as a coach, an academic coach, to lead it. When I see a need, I inquire. Your data now I've inquired with all my students. So, how are you getting the data processed? They're not going to come tell me that they're not getting it processed because they think they've collected their numbers and that's the end of the story. We've got to do something with those numbers now. Let's tell a story because that's going to be your conclusion. And so, I have to reach out to them many times. And I found myself many times contacting them. I haven't seen you in 2 weeks.
So
How's your writing
aberration.
coming along?
You're coming in.
Well,
Give up.
there was even a point towards the end of the semester or towards the end of the summer, and having that one-on-one relationship, Dr. Surgeon really started to figure out who I was as a person, and he realized that I'm the kind of person who has difficulty asking for help. Like, I just learn to plug through whatever I have to do. And so as I was getting towards the end of the summer and I was doing my writing, I felt like I knew what I needed to do, but I was still getting bogged down. So getting that email that said, "Hey, I haven't seen you in a week. How is it going?" One of the first things I typed back was, "Hey, thanks for reaching out to me," because I was just starting to get lost in what I thought I was doing okay, but really actually did need to reach out for help. And so that was really beneficial, and I can testify to the soft music and the dim lights. But just having a professor feel like they see you as a person and they hear your story, that made working with Dr. Surgeon and everything else so much easier because I knew that I was in a safe place, and I'd be in there for hours, talking about research and then rabbit trailing down some other psychology thing that we both found interesting. And you can, I think, so many of I'm going to tell on you for a second. So many of the McNair scholars, we would talk about Dr. Surgeon and we'd all be like, "Yeah, I was in there, I thought I'd only be there an hour, and it ended up being 4 hours," and we'd all look at each other and be like, "Yes, that happened to me too." So. But we end up talking about exploring so many of the different details of our research and so many different things that even just we find interesting on a personal level, and just having that holistic approach to working with our faculty mentor or our coach or whichever.
Those conversations are pretty amazing. And I won't monopolize this, but you know, you deal with young singers and they get ready for their first required performance and performance seminar. They got to be on stage for like 2.5 minutes, you know, and they're like paralyzed with fear. And so we talk about stage fright. Well, what really is stage fright and how can you get around it? So I tell them all a bunch of stories about disasters that I've had on stage and kind of laugh about it. And I think that they go, oh, well, look at that. And he survived it, huh? We talk about what is it, this whole neural pathway thing is utterly fascinating. You know, you should study a singer brain sometime and just see what's in there. We're a mess. We're an utter mess. But I talked to my gateway class actually about is stage fright and nerves, is it actually based in pride because you're afraid of what people will think about you? So that's like a whole emotional thing. But it's like your guys, they're nervous. They want to get out there and do well. My babies they're scared to death. They want to do well. And the conversations that you have about, here's what this is going to feel like. You're going to walk out on that stage and there's 200 people that you know sitting there. Okay, this is how the stage feels. All of those kinds of things you haven't sung a note. You haven't kicked a ball yet, but it's this mind game.
You know, there's a lot of love there that overcomes nerves too. If you enjoy the game, and it's actually it's exciting to be on.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
And I tell my
about
people full out. Look, I'm a professional singer. I've been at this a long time. I hate practice. I love performing. I hate practice. So if you hate practice and you're having a hard time getting to the practice room, welcome. You're normal.
Yeah.
My wife is the only person I know that loves to practice. You know, and Tony.
Yeah.
Tony puts me to shame. He practices his craft all the time. I cram for it. But it's fascinating, the whole psychological end of things linked to the performance end of things. And a performance doesn't have to be in music. It can be in whatever. But it's a psych game. It really is a mind game.
It is,
Mind game.
yeah. So any final words? I know we're at the end of our time, but
Thank you for sharing all that. Thank you.
yes,
Yeah.
thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. I mean, we're a few here, but we can say Tony, wherever you are, thank you. Yeah, thanks so much.